This story occurred several years ago. I had traveled to Georgia from Turkey for vacation. I heard the views were beautiful. It was recommended by a friend. Being young and dumb, I agreed. Why not, I asked myself. So I booked a flight. I found a cheap house that looked good. Good deal, I thought. And it was next to a mountain. The trouble began. I entered the house after I received my keys. I got a bad aura from the place as a whole. There were a lot of paintings in the house, a TV. It was quite decked. Why sell the house for so cheap if it's good? I asked myself. I went to an electronics store, got some data, and started watching some YouTube in the kitchen. After a while, I looked around the house. Something was off, I could tell. The house gave me an uneasy feeling as a whole. I felt like I had butterflies in my stomach, so I did a little tour around, looking at the furniture and all, the usual. I went to a bedroom upstairs. As soon as I came into that specific room, it had an even worse aura than the rest of the house. I went and sat on the bed. There was a little window and a table on the right side of the room. It gave a beautiful view. I felt like I needed to go to the bathroom. I go in. As I'm doing my thing, I feel someone walking upstairs. I could definitely hear something. When I go to wash my hands, I'm amazed. I see red stains, blood, all over the sink. I thought it was very sketchy. I felt scared instantly. I don't know why. Not a normal panic. To the bone panic. I washed my hands and got out instantly. It's night already? I thought. I look at my phone and it's 5-something p.m., early night. I wash the stains away from the sink and go to the bedroom because of the strong aura it gave off. I somehow ended up sleeping on the bed, probably because of the exhaustion from traveling. I ended up being awoken by a loud scream. I mean loud. Never heard such a blood-curdling scream in my life. It was so loud I didn't even know where it came from. I ran to the window. Nothing. Ran downstairs, and to my horror, I hear the scream coming from upstairs. You see, when I heard the scream come from upstairs, I got a bad, bad feeling. My guts told me, run. And so I did, out of the house, locked the door, looked at the window upstairs. Bad, bad decision. Someone had covered it with curtains. I knew I hadn't covered it with curtains because I ran downstairs immediately after hearing the scream. I'm so scared. I went to my car and sat in there thinking of what the hell was going on as my heart raced. I picked up all my courage, which took me an hour or two, and I went in. I knew nobody in that country. This was my first experience living there, and it was hell. I went in the house, stood in the front door for God knows how long, and took a step inside. I went upstairs slowly, entered that cursed bedroom. A painting had fallen and the windows and curtains were somehow gone. The window was closed, though. I look under the bed in the closet, suspecting someone to be there with a knife from the kitchen. I feel a touch on my shoulder. I look behind me quickly. It's a random Georgian man, and I ask him what the hell he was doing here. He said he was the previous house owner, and that the realtor who sold me the house sold it for cheap because it is haunted. He said that he himself left the house and told the realtor that he didn't want to sell, but he did anyways. He told me to get out with all of my belongings, and so I did. He said the family that lived there previously were sketchy as hell. I left the house the day after, sleeping in my car. The rest of the few weeks there were pretty good. I've had horrid dreams of dying and someone hysterically laughing ever since. Please, do not buy deals that are too good to be true. The house owner also mentioned that the bedroom I hated and got a bad aura from was because they had done their rituals or whatever things in there, and that sleeping on that bed, quote unquote, gave me the curse. Never returned. Never will. I want to start by saying my boyfriend's house seems to have been haunted for a while now, since he has been having abnormal things happen to him before, mostly hearing voices and steps in the room upstairs. However, recently there seems to have been an increase in activity in the room upstairs where we usually hang out. A few weeks ago, I completely lost one of my gloves there. We searched the whole room, but it was simply nowhere to be found. About a week later, we found it upstairs, exactly where I had put it down. Just flat. They're completely visible. We've also been hearing a lot more walking, especially yesterday night. There was a power outage on our part of town, and we were in the room just hanging out with a flashlight. We suddenly heard very loud steps in the next room, and in the same room as us. No one else was awake, and even then, everyone was in their pajamas, and the steps were obviously from someone wearing shoes and carrying some kind of metallic object with them. Immediately after we heard this, we left the room and the power just came back suddenly, which I don't know if it was related, but it was very suspicious. I'd like to know if anyone has any suggestions on how to make this stop. Because besides being scary, it's also very annoying, since upstairs is where we usually go to chill and watch TV or something, and we end up just having to leave because the energy in that room becomes too much to handle after these events happen. I don't know if I should also mention, he recently got a necklace with an inverted pentagram with a goat inside, which he really likes. We thought it could be linked to this increase in activity, but I don't know since my glove disappeared before he got it. I work at Sherwin-Williams, the paint company. I open every morning and am always there alone in the store for the first 10 to 15 minutes. I walked into the building, turned on the lights, and went to count the money in the till. I had been there about 5 to 7 minutes. All the doors are still locked. I walked from the showroom into the warehouse, and just as I did, I heard the sound of something hitting the floor in the showroom and sliding. I went back and found a pack of paint rollers on the floor about 5 feet away from the shelf they were on, which was the bottom shelf about 4 inches off the floor. So yeah, they could have fallen off due to vibrations or something. But to slide 5 feet away from the shelf? This isn't the only paranormal thing that's happened there either. Many more experiences by many other folks. I work in a haunted salon. It's a 114-year-old shotgun house with super high ceilings and pocket doors. It's located in an industrial area in the south. I think the house was relocated because it's super out of place. They bought the house back in the 90s for $20,000 with the intention of bulldozing it and expanding their family company next door. However, the city wouldn't let them because it's the oldest house in our town. It has been vacant the whole time they owned it, except for a brief period when their cousin lived in it. It didn't have power or plumbing, so the cousin ran a hose and extension cord from next door. They had to gut the entire place during the renovation. The inside was rotting and falling apart. It's beautiful now. They preserved the pocket doors and kept the same layout. The natural light is amazing. I love working here. It's just me and Dee that work in the house. She does facials and lashes, and I do hair. So on to the good stuff. When I first started, Dee told me the batteries from the thermostat kept going missing. We have cameras all over the salon and outside. She would watch the cameras and nothing would show up. One day pretty recently, we had someone working in the attic. He came down and said, "You know there's a bunch of batteries up there, right?" Another time, this is my favorite story. Dee and I were working on a Saturday. She poured a glass of wine for her client and replaced the cork. I remember watching her do this because she flipped the bottle upside down to make sure it was secure, and I thought it was funny. She put the wine back in the fridge and did the service. After she was finished, she left for the day. I left to run an errand, and when I got back to the salon, I came in to find wine all over the floor. I look in the fridge, and the wine doesn't have the cork in it. The cork is on top of the fridge. I texted her something along the lines of, "You forgot to put the cork back in, you dumb hoe," and she responded, "You watched me cork the wine and laughed at me." I told her to watch the cameras, so she did. The cameras show me walking out the door, and then they go offline. Dee was here alone one day doing a facial. She shuts her door when she does facials and massage. Mid-facial, she heard someone walking up and down the hallway. She thought it was me because I wear boots to work and it sounded like someone in boots. Then it sounded like someone slammed against her door, so she walked out and there was nobody there. She watched the cameras and there's nothing. Nobody's in the hall. I hear knocking, walking, and even faint talking sometimes. I don't feel super scared. I get a little freaked out when I'm here at night by myself, but for the most part, I don't feel threatened. When I first started, I posted a bunch of pictures of the space on my Instagram. One of my friends stopped me one day and said, "I don't know if you're aware, but there's a presence in each photo you posted." I didn't think much of what she said because I didn't see the presence that she was pointing out. It's weird when other people bring it up with no context. Dee had a client in her mid-60s pull her aside after her service and said, "Baby, you got some spirits in here. They're not evil, but you might want to open up a Bible and let them find their way." One more story for now. Last night, Dee closed up the salon. We are super vigilant about turning lights off because this house would burst into flames if there was a spark. She turned everything off and the doors lock automatically, but we always check because it's kind of a sketchy part of town. She comes in this morning and every single light is on, and the front door is wide open. Nothing was moved. We both have cash laying around, and none was missing. I had an imaginary friend whose name was Emily. She had long blonde hair, and her face was half gone. She told me her mom died when she was very young, and her dad got very sad and killed her and himself, and she never told me how she was killed, just that her dad did it. Well, one day we were playing outside in my mom's garden and my mom yells, "Time for dinner!" So I go in as usual, but asked my mom if Emily could join. She knew she was my friend and never told me she wasn't real, so of course she said, "Yeah, you two can share a plate." So after eating, we go outside for a walk, and my mom always liked to get to know the people around. Now, there weren't very many kids in the neighborhood at the time, so I was usually by myself. While my mom was talking, the older woman saw me and said, "It's great to see more kids around here. We haven't seen many since the accident." Well, my mom got to wondering and asked what had happened, so the older woman said, "There was a little girl who used to live here. Her name was Emily. She lived with both parents until her mother died. She and her mom were the sweetest people you could meet. She said that she was around my age when she died." Flash forward. She's talking about after the mother died, and how her father became an alcoholic and started to use heavy drugs. I guess no one knew until they died. That's when I told my mom about Emily, the one I had been hanging out with, and said something along the lines of, "That's the exact same thing my friend told me." My mom gave me a look and asked me what did I mean by that. So I told her what Emily has told me about how her dad killed her and then proceeded to kill himself. The lady gave us all a weird look and told us what had happened. That's the day I found out how she died. Her dad beat her to death with a hammer. That's why her face was like that. And after that day, it's the last time I even saw or thought about her until now. I had a dream of her last night, and she was with my little brother. I woke up and ran upstairs so fast, only to find my brother talking to someone on the couch, but no one was even there. Then today is when he started to talk about her to me. I told him everything. And now I don't know what's gonna happen. Something tapped me multiple times while falling asleep. A little background. I'm 18, male, and have never had proper sleep paralysis. Until a few days ago. Or so I think. I was laying on my back, hands by my sides, eyes closed. I wasn't fully asleep yet, but I was slowly dozing off, still slightly awake. All of a sudden, I feel 3 hard taps on my forehead. It was like a thin line that spanned across my forehead, almost as if someone took a business or credit card and tapped me with it 3 times. Not even a full second after the forehead taps, I feel a hard impact right on my stomach. It caused me to sit up straight and pull my knees in. It felt like someone dropped something on my gut and took the wind out of me. I immediately turned on the lights and looked around my room and found nothing out of the ordinary. I'm still so confused by it. and wondering if anyone else has experienced something similar or has any insight. I saw a post about a story with an alley that seems to take forever to walk yesterday, and it reminded me of something that happened to me when I first started university. Norwich is an old medieval city in England and has lots of beautiful and interesting old places to visit. One of its most famous buildings is the towering Norwich Cathedral, opposite Tombland, which sits down by the River Winsome. Anyhow, busy exploring my new city one Saturday, I visited the cathedral, and after wandering the building, decided to explore the cathedral close. It was a late, sunny afternoon in October with lots of autumn leaves on the ground, and I was really enjoying my walk when I stumbled upon a cobbled alley at the end of some houses and decided to see where it led. The floor and walls were cobbled, and the walls maybe 10 feet high, so I couldn't see over them, but at first could hear people in their gardens on the other side talking and children playing, so although I was on my own in the alleyway, I didn't feel alone. But as I walked on, the alley began to twist and turn, and although the sky was blue overhead and the sun was still out, I began to feel increasingly uneasy. I could no longer hear voices coming from the other side of the walls, and when I thought about it, realized that, in fact, I couldn't hear anything. No birds, no traffic, not even wind. And yet the cathedral is in the middle of a reasonably sized city. I began to feel even more nervous, and my scalp started to prick. So I picked up my pace, telling myself that I'd been walking a while and that the alleyway couldn't go on forever. But as I turned each blind bend, hoping to see the end of what was beginning to feel like a maze, I was only met with another stretch of alleyway. I began to jog, and although I didn't see anyone since entering the alley and couldn't hear any footsteps on the cobbles behind me, I had the growing sensation that someone or something bad was following me close behind, and that the walls were pressing in. I started having difficulty breathing, and realized I was also beginning to feel dizzy. I didn't want to pass out alone in this alleyway, and so I decided to run. After what seemed like forever, I turned another corner and suddenly sprinted out onto a perfectly normal-looking street down by the river, and the city sounds returned. I realized I was shaking. My hands and forehead were dripping with sweat, and I didn't have a clue where I was. I sat down on a wall and had a cigarette, and pulled myself together. Then stopped a passerby and asked for directions back to the market square in the middle of town from where I could find my own way back to the campus. It didn't take long to walk back to the market square, but when I checked my watch, it turned out that I had been in that alley for nearly an hour. It didn't make any sense, as I couldn't have walked that far. But I didn't want to think too much about it, and so I told myself that maybe all the twists and turns in the alley had added the time. At class on Monday, I was telling a few people about the alleyway and the cathedral grounds, and how it had suddenly turned really spooky when one of the mature students on our course, who'd lived in Norwich for years and knew a lot about its history, overheard me. She asked me if the alley was an old cobbled one, with high walls, that led off of the cathedral close, and I said yes. She took me aside and quietly explained to me that she wasn't surprised I'd felt what I did, because that was the alleyway they'd dragged people accused of witchcraft along before burning them at the stake. Norwich has a huge history with witches. But the kicker to this story is that, though I lived in Norwich for a number of years and often visited the cathedral, I never walked that alleyway again because of what had happened that afternoon until, one day, a friend from overseas was visiting. I took her down to the cathedral and, while there, told her about the alleyway and what I'd experienced. She insisted that we walk it, and when I stalled and started to make excuses, promised me that if things started to go bad, we could just turn back, and she would stay with me at all times. Reluctantly, I agreed. The alley was just how I remembered it. At first. Dry cobbled floor, high cobbled walls backing onto people's gardens, but after perhaps 10 minutes at most and only a handful of turns, suddenly we found ourselves back out on the street. It didn't make any sense to me back then, and it still doesn't to this day. Recently, me and about 9 other friends stayed in a large Airbnb house. This house had 3 stories. On the first evening we were staying there, I was on the middle floor when I heard what sounded like my friend calling out to me, asking me to come upstairs to help them. I shouted back, "What's up?" They responded with, "Just come up and I'll show you." I went upstairs and straight to the friend that I was talking to. He seemed very confused. According to him and everyone around him, no one had said anything. I thought that maybe I thought someone was talking to me when they weren't. But no one had really been chatting at the time. I assumed they were messing with me and went on with my day. The next morning, a friend that wasn't aware of the previous event had said she was a little creeped out by her room. It had a wardrobe with sliding mirror doors. She had closed them when she had left the room last, but on her return she went to go to bed, and they were opened. She thought nothing of it, closed them, and lay in bed on her phone. She says that later, the doors slid open by themselves again. She closed them, assuming that maybe the house was slightly slanted or something. The doors later slid open in the opposite direction. She didn't sleep well that night. The final incident came on the last day we stayed there when a friend of mine mentioned that the piano creeped him out at night. I mentioned that there was no piano. He said he distinctly heard a piano playing at about 3 a.m. A different friend later also claimed hearing a piano at 3 a.m. We tried to rationalize it, saying maybe someone was watching TV or some video on their phones. I asked around, and no one was awake at 3. That's about it. Occasionally all of us reported finding sliding doors open that we had sworn we had closed, but due to having so many people in the house, there was no way we couldn't be sure that it wasn't someone opening them. No one can explain the other stuff, though. This story is from a while back, before I moved to my current home. In 2016, my mom and I moved into a very old house. Over the few years we lived there, we had quite a few experiences, but the most notable for me personally was the incident of where I came face to face with the burned man upstairs. It was a weeknight, and I had school the next day. At around midnight I went to bed, which was a bit early for me at the time. A few hours later I woke up, drenched in sweat, and my fan was turned off. Annoyed, I rolled over to turn it back on and looked up at my door, noticing that it was open. The door opened a bit more, and a strange-looking, nude man was standing before me. He seemed abnormally tall. I'd say at least 6'8". His head was nearly touching the door frame, and his skin appeared off, similar to skin grafts that burn victims receive. It appeared visibly tacky and wasn't very pleasant to look at. But its face was even worse. The skin on its mouth seemed to have been drawn back, exposing the gums fully, and one eye seemed far too small and the other far too large. Whatever this was, it just stood there in my doorway, looking at me. It smiled after it made eye contact. To this day, I can't tell you why I responded this way. I get grumpy when I first wake up, and this was no exception. I told this thing, "Fuck off," and rolled over, falling back asleep. After turning my fan back on, of course. That morning, my door was still open, but nothing was there. I went into full panic mode and refused to sleep there for weeks after it finally set in what I saw, which didn't help much. Some things to consider. This home was once a funeral home, which had a fire a long time ago. I'm not sure if anyone was hurt or killed in this fire or not. I always sleep with my door closed, and I remember closing my door that night. It was a bit finicky, however, as there was no lock, and due to the house shifting, if you stepped on a certain floorboard, it would pop open. I would have noticed this, however. At no point did I feel threatened during this encounter, despite its strange appearance. I'm not a hard-ass by any means, and I have a respectful fear of the paranormal. Out of the other experiences in this house, this was the one time I didn't feel scared or creeped out by a paranormal event. I never talked about it after the first time it happened, and nobody but my mom knew until now. My mom's friend and their little boy moved in. Despite nobody telling him about what I saw, he would wake up screaming in the dead of night about the tall man with the weird face. Does anyone know what this might have been? First, as a side note, my son-in-law, SIL, lost his father his senior year of high school, so none of us knew this man. Fast forward years later. My daughter, SIL, and grandson, just turned 3, were relocating because of employment and in the process of unpacking. My SIL hadn't opened a box of items for years that included photos of his father and decided to go through some of it. Wanting to share something with his little boy, my SIL called my grandson into the room and said, "I'd like to show you a picture of someone." My grandson is given the picture to hold, and my SIL is going to tell him about the man in the picture being his grandfather when my grandson said, "I know him." My SIL kind of grunt laughed and said that he couldn't know this man because it's just a picture of a man who wasn't around. And my grandson proceeded to say how he knew this man very well, as he comes to play with my grandson when he is playing in his room. My SIL attempted a couple of times to let my grandson know that he couldn't be correct, but when a toddler is determined, My grandson would mention this a few more times, but my kids never pushed it. I think my SIL was still too torn up about his father to even consider what may have been happening, and so just acted like it wasn't happening at all. Yet, to my SIL's credit, he never tried to tell my grandson that he was wrong or that it was pretend, because my SIL didn't want to discredit my grandson. It also wasn't really spoken of outside of our family unit. Not from embarrassment or anything, but out of respect for my SIL, who felt that was something private for the family only. Also, this was never brought up to my grandson and only spoken of if he brought it up. My SIL probably just wasn't ready for this. My grandson is 7 now and has no memory of any of this happening. He only knows of having this grandfather via photos. Hello all, I hope you enjoyed part 2 of this truly weird ghost story series I've got going, and if you did, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons for me, as well as that notification bell to stay updated on all the latest content. I'll be working on bringing you more parts to this ongoing series of paranormal accounts in the near future. I wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much for all of the support and advice I've received from everyone so far in regard to the quality of the content on the channel too. It's really important to me as the channel continues to grow, and I greatly appreciate every single one of you. These past few weeks have been rough for everyone I know, and I'm just glad to be able to provide any entertainment to you at all that I possibly can in these times, and I hope everyone is safe and sound as much as they possibly can be as we continue our efforts to slow the spread of this virus as we near the peak of the epidemic. So to those of us who are high risk especially, I send you all the best vibes, and I hope you all manage to come through this unscathed. As I said though, I'm just glad to be able to do my part in some way by giving you a bit of entertainment and distraction, more of which is on its way. Until next time, this is K.E. Goodwin here at Undead Storyteller, signing off.